The Australian Financial Review.
There's moments in your career where you've got to speak up and use your voice for good, and that's what I did do. I got lots of pushback, some hate mail, but for every customer I may have lost, we might have gained 10. When I look back, you almost got to write your resignation in advance. So when I look back, what will I be known for? What will I be remembered for? To make sure that you leave a positive legacy.
Hi, I'm Sally Patton, the editor of Boss from the Australian Financial Review, and welcome to 15 Minutes with the Boss, a podcast about success and failure and everything in between, and along the way we're aiming to get some great advice from our leaders. My guest today is Paul Zahra, the Chief Executive of the Australian Retailers Association. Hi Paul, are you well?
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming in, looking very dapper, I must say, in a beautiful green jacket.
Flash will get you everywhere, Sally.
Paul, as I said, you're the CEO of the Australian Retailers Association, which represents more than 120,000 physical and online shops that employ more than 1.4 million Australians. So that's quite a few people that you're advocating on behalf of. And I should also say that you're the former CEO of department store Divulges. It's so lovely to have you on the podcast. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we've only got 15 minutes. Let's get started. Paul, my first question is about your morning routine. What time do you get up? What happens?
Well, look, I'm a really early riser, so I get up before most people. 4:45 is probably the latest I would get up. I'm normally up and at 'em, black coffee, at the gym by 5:30 most days. If not, I'll be at the office earlier. I generally sort of make sure that I get organised the night before, have breakfast, and then I walk to work every morning. And during that time, I listen to RN Breakfast on the ABC because it's my only time to actually be across the headlines for the day. My job is very much following the politics and knowing what the headlines are, and it usually determines whether I'm going to have a good day or a bad day. So I sort of want to be across what I'm up for.
So when you say you prepare the night before, what do you prepare?
I'm very much around making sure that I use my time really well. So knowing what's in my calendar, whether that's morning television, whether I'm having to do a radio interview, if I'm able to be organised, just to make sure I've got all the information I need to get through my day as seamlessly as possible.
So what time do you go to sleep if you're getting up at 4:30, 4:45? It's pretty early.
I'm an early riser, but also early to bed. So usually by 8 o'clock I'm in bed. It's a fairly disciplined life, and more so in this job because I need to be ahead of the day.
Wow, okay, that's really disciplined of you. Okay, Paul, my next question is about a pivotal moment in your career. Was there a time or a point where something happened that somehow changed the trajectory of what you were doing?
The interesting thing for me, there was a particular moment in time that actually really impacted me. It was actually relates to an AFR journalist. Now, I can't remember the journalist, to be frank, but I got a call during the marriage equality debate around me going on the record around marriage equality. And at that time, this is 10 years ago, ASX-listed CEOs completely stayed in their swim lane. They did not talk about social justice in any way. It was very much around the fact that the journalists are saying they were just really struggling to get somebody to speak on the record, and would I do that? And I had to really think about why would I do it and what the impact would be if I did speak up. And I gave it lots of great thought because, in fact, in my mind, it was around the respect for equality and the importance of treating customers equal, but equally for our staff. Most people within the organisation knew that I was gay, and this is my opportunity to actually make sure that I went on the record in support of marriage equality from an equality perspective more than a marriage perspective.
At the time you were working for?
I was running David Jones at the time.
And did you tell the board?
Well, I didn't need to. It was in the press, so they all were very aware. They weren't that happy about the time. I think the rest is history because for me, there's moments in your career where you've got to speak up and use your voice for good, and that's what I did do. I got lots of pushback, some hate mail, but for every customer I may have lost, we might have gained 10, in my opinion. So it was a really important moment in my career. And then when I left David Jones, oddly enough, most of the work that I got was actually in DE&I, which is diversity, equity and inclusion, as an advisor for large corporates wanting to change the makeup of their organisations. I did a lot of work there. I became the chair of the advisory board for PwC in D&I. And, it's sort of, I didn't have the formal training, but that lived experience made a big difference in my next job.
So actually it even helped you in your career, and as soon as you left David Jones, you had other things you could immediately walk into.
That's true. So oddly enough, I had more work in D&I than I did in retail at the time. So it was a real good bridging role for me for a period of time.
And what was the hardest part about deciding to say something and then the aftermath?
I think it's important to trust your intuition, speak up where it aligns to your own personal values, and if it's worth fighting for, then you should. And I was prepared to give up my career and impact my career if that's what it meant. I knew it wouldn't get to that, but sometimes you've got to change history by speaking up.
I love that. My next question is, what is the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
Knowing when to leave a party, a relationship, and a job. I always strongly believe around leaving a party when you're having a good time. I think that goes not with relationships so much, but certainly with jobs. Knowing the right time to go and knowing when you've had your moment in the sun and it's time to hand the baton over to a successor. Ideally, it's best to leave on your terms.
So when do you ideally think it is time to go in terms of being a CEO? Like after how many years should you start thinking that?
Look, there's a whole science to it, but generally CEOs, I think the average tenure keeps getting less and less. You wouldn't want to do less than 2 and you probably shouldn't do more than 5. That's really the time frame.
So I assume you're talking about David Jones?
Yes, I think David Jones, but in my current role, I've just stepped down as well. So in fact, it's timely that we're having this conversation and I've just hit that 5-year mark.
So how do you know when it's time to go?
You can sense it in your own self when it's time to move on. When you believe that what you set out to do has been done, when you believe that you have little less to offer, when you start to see what you're doing is becoming more and more routine and the joy starts to reduce, it's time to go.
Okay, on that note, Paul, we're going to take a short break, but don't go away. When we come back, we're going to open the beautiful chatterbox. Welcome back to 15 Minutes with the Boss. I'm here with Paul Zahra, the CEO of the Australian Retailers Association. Now, Paul, this is our section called the Chatterbox. In front of you is a beautiful brown box with about 15 to 20 questions inside. I'm going to ask you to have a bit of a forage round, pick out a few questions, and we're then going to play our Chatterbox game. Okay, here we go. What are your favourite interview questions when hiring somebody and why?
I stick with standard interview questions generally, which are the general HR questions, but I always ask people what their career aspirations are. You get to a sense of whether they're going to join and stay, whether this is the job of their dreams, or they're aspiring for something completely different, or using this as a stepping stone onto something else. And it allows you then to understand their motivations. And I think that's really important.
I was talking to someone the other day who gave me a piece of advice, and she said the secret to running a good business is to hire fast and fire fast, because you never know exactly like how good someone is going to be, because all you can do is look at their CV and interview them. Do you tend to spend a lot of time hiring somebody, or do you also hire and fire fast?
I do hire fast and fire fast. I think I'm known for holding people to account, and if people, particularly in that first 3 to 6 months, if people haven't stepped up, haven't actually absorbed the role and showing visible difference, then they're not going to make it, and you should move on them. And I think it's one of the lessons I learned very early in my career around actually not delaying decisions on people. Particularly when you get to a CEO level, you're really the sum of everybody else's efforts. And if you think of it that way, you only succeed if you've got really great soldiers that are delivering on the work that's required. So it's a really good principle to own.
And do you also think that you can overthink hiring people, because you could interview lots and lots of people, but you're never really going to know someone? So do you think about overthinking it?
Yeah, look, I'm an overthinker. I'll state that. But I also think, yes, you can. There's a risk in overthinking, because some people are professional interviewees, so they know what answers to give you. And I think you've always got to ask people to give examples, get them to demonstrate, because then if they can't quickly get to an example, it's very hard to make all those examples up in your mind very quickly. But I also think managing the risk, you think about if they don't work out, what is the risk? So you might come back for a second interview. But if it's a contract role for a short period of time and the risk is low, then you start to make some sort of compromises. So managing the risk becomes an important part.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Have a fish. Let's go
dip.
for another question. Another dip indeed. Okay. Who is a leader, business or otherwise, whom you really admire and why?
You're probably going to be surprised by my response.
Yes.
My response is actually not a business leader so much, but Sir Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister at the time of the UK during the wartime effort. Now, the reason why I say that, not necessarily about his politics, but I think he was highly intelligent, very philosophical, and a lot of the things I've struggled with from a leadership perspective, he's actually on the record giving a response to. And I think when I first went into the CEO's role, when I was appointed at David Jones, I think what I learned quite quickly, you're not going to please everybody. One of the things that Winston Churchill famously said, if you have enemies, good, because it means you've stood for something.
Okay.
And that's really changed my mindset around actually not, I've had this constant wanting to please others. And in fact, the times where I've upset people, I've created enemies, is because I've stood for something that was really important to me. And there's many quotable quotes by Winston Churchill that, from a leadership point of view, has been very helpful.
Interesting. And anything else from Winston Churchill that particularly stands out?
Winston Churchill was also famous for saying, that he was asked once in an interview whether he was going to cut funding from the arts to fund the war effort. And his response to that was, well, in fact, if we're not fighting for art, then what are we fighting for? And I had to think that through a little bit further. It was all around the fact that artists generally are expressing themselves, and that the whole idea around war was around to achieve peace, was actually to allow people to express themselves.
So that ability to express yourself freely, I guess, is the operative
Absolutely.
word there. And how does that play into your everyday activity or the way you think?
Well, I think because for me, being different to most, being a visible gay person, I guess that for me, I've had to be very conscious. I spent most of my earlier life having to fit in, having to not be obvious. And now that I realise it's truly a celebration, I think being different, understanding your own differences, not necessarily if you're LGBTIQ, but if you're different to others, whatever that difference is, that you should celebrate it and see it as a superpower.
Okay, interesting. So actually, do you see being LGBTQI now as a superpower?
Absolutely. So I think about, particularly in my work, because I've been in the retail industry, I've been in fashion, I would argue that I understand women more than a straight man would, but equally having that fashionability sensibility, that comes quite naturally to gay men. My ability to actually manage largely a female workforce has put me in good stead. So when I think about all the qualities I have as an LGBTIQ leader, it is definitely a superpower. The downsides that are there, dealing with homophobia, that's something you have to deal with. But I think over time I've learnt more how to manage that as I've gotten older.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Next question, have a fish. How do you create a positive culture in your company?
It's always hard when you're managing large groups of people because the culture can often be embedded way before you're even the CEO. Yeah. That is hard, but you've got to work at it around the edges. In a smaller organisation, with people that I work with directly that are direct reports, I always try to work out what motivates them and where their boundaries are and try and focus on what they're really good at and try to amplify that. And that creates quite a positive workplace culture.
So, Paul, you talk about the importance of finding out what motivates other people. What motivates you?
Look, I'm motivated by doing a good job, and that's always been my career. I've always never looked around me. I've always focused on the value I was adding. So I feel that I always want to make sure that the job that I'm in, when I look back, you almost got to write your resignation in advance. So when I look back, what will I be known for? What will I be remembered for? And making sure you're working to that outcome to make sure that you leave a positive legacy.
So do you consciously think, or have you been thinking while you've been doing this job, what will my legacy be? What will I be known for?
From day one.
And what do you think that'll be?
Well, for me, the organisation's been going for over 100 years. It didn't have the profile that it has today. And I wanted people to see the retail industry for what it was, that it employed 1 in 10 Australians. It was the largest private sector. And that retail, whilst it's hard work, it's an amazing career. I started my career as a shop assistant at the local Target store at the age of 15 whilst I was studying. I didn't think back then that I was going to be the CEO of a department store. All I ever wanted to do was to do a good job. And by the age of 22, I was running a Target store, which I look back now and think, how the hell did I do? Because most of the staff at the time were all older than me. But it just happened naturally because I was just always best in show. For me, that narrative has got to be really strong around what do you want to be known for.
And just on that issue of managing older people, was that difficult? Did you find a way of doing that?
It wasn't as difficult, but oddly enough, I did a course on supervision about supervising others. It was a very basic course, and I learned from the teacher at that time, and she said to me, find things you can align on. So what I started to do when I was at work, part of actually giving instructions and getting things done was asking for recipes from a mature woman, or asking assistance on something that was actually outside of my skill set. That's the way you develop relationships. You align on that sense of teamwork and that you demonstrate respect.
And that, Paul, is the end of the Chatterbox. Now, my last question I'm going to slightly tweak today because you are leaving the Retailers Association. So I will ask you, what are you going to do when you leave the association? What plans have you got? Are you going to take a long holiday? What's going to happen?
Well, first up, I'm super excited about not having to work Christmas Day and Boxing Day for the first time for God knows how long. So I'm going to be very excited about that.
Yay.
But my plan is to have a break. I spent my whole life planning and being organised and being disciplined. And for the first time, it'll be quite organic and unstructured. And I'll work out in the new year what that may look like. But it's most likely to look like a portfolio career, which is what I had between running David Jones and between this role. Anything from sitting on boards through to private equity to doing supporting others where I can. And
do you want a slightly less grueling lifestyle?
I don't mind the grueling. I'd just be nice not have to be somewhere at a particular time each morning. But less grueling would be great because there's wear and tear on the body, and you sort of, as I'm getting older, I'm sort of looking forward to actually having a bit more me time and doing other things outside of the industry that might be a little bit more creative.
And on that note, Paul, our time is up. I've so much enjoyed talking to you today. I really love the quote that you have from Winston Churchill that if you're going to have enemies, that's actually a good thing because it means that you're standing for something, and that might be difficult, but it is really important to do that. I love the fact that you hire fast and fire fast. You need to have good people around you because you are, as a leader, the sum of everyone else's efforts. I really like the way you think about what your legacy is going to be, and that clearly helps to motivate you and set your path of what you do every day. And I also really like the way you have gone about gaining the trust of people, not just older people when you're working at Target, but figuring out what motivates the people around you so that you can get the best out of them and they can trust you have a great relationship. So, Paul, thank you again so much for allowing us to spend 15 minutes with the boss.
Thanks, Sally.
And thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the podcast and would like to hear more, please consider sharing the podcast or writing a review, as it helps us to reach more people. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com, and you can subscribe to the Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was hosted by me, Sally Patton, and produced and edited by Lap Fan. Video and audio assistance, and our music theme is by Alex Gow, and our executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.